on Monday, March 2nd at 7:02 p.m. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everyone could rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you.
Can I interrupt for 2 seconds? Quick question.
Sure.
I just had somebody reach out to me and say that there's no Zoom link on the agenda website.
There is no Zoom link because this is not an interactive webinar with the public. Whenever there is no public comment, they can watch directly live stream through the YouTube channel.
Okay, they said that YouTube isn't live yet. Is that?
It is. It is. It's
It
live.
is.
Perfect. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
I go live as soon as Debbie says, okay, we have enough board members, then we go live.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
All right, no worries. So good evening, and I wanted to sort of jump right in. We have one member of the board who needs to leave early, so let's take advantage of the time we have as the biggest group, although we have perhaps an extensive discussion tonight. I'd like to first thank SLAM, represented by Jim Hoagland and Kemp Morhart, for their presentation last week. We sent them a few follow-up questions, which I hope they can begin to address tonight. And there may be a couple more from board members. So I want to thank Jim and Kemp for being available tonight as well. And our aim is for them to attend the first part of the meeting. So hopefully that means around 30 to 45 minutes. So if we could jump right into a couple of the follow-up questions. I had a couple, not because I don't necessarily understand them, but because I think they're important points. So I would just appreciate a very quick and high-level explanation. In our public's mind, the last price we heard was 110 million for the project. And I know there were some changes, et cetera. Could you just very briefly explain the cost, the reason for the increase? Not dollar by dollar, but just the major factors.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Kemp Morhart from Slime Collaborative. So we saw that question in the questions that you sent around. And, without doing a deep dive into the previous estimate, I think the biggest variable is the square footage. Based on the net to gross factor that we explained at the last meeting. And then also the, 2 years later, the escalation of the marketplace also increases our starting point, if you will. So those two factors are really the biggest factor, but the area being the biggest.
Okay. And then the gross up factor that you said was different is, I'm just going to, maybe you can summarize it better than I can, but my understanding is the original one was done with too tight a view, and it's not realistic.
In our opinion, yes. So hopefully I can explain it a little bit better than I did last time. The way to think of it is what we call the net square feet. So your net program, which is the bottom line of all of the spaces that are in your ed spec. That comprises, in our experience, for a middle school of this size, anywhere from 62 to 64% of your entire building area. And so what the numbers that they had in the ed spec represented a 77% net to gross, which we feel is just too tight. You wouldn't be able to get that much net program area into a building of 104, 700 and change gross square feet and have adequate room for structure, corridors, mechanical spaces, restrooms, and so forth. And if you recall, I made the adjustment to take out some of those things in our analysis.
Okay, thank you. Another question I had, and maybe that will become more germane later, but If you could weigh in on what you would think if, in fact, we wanted to not have a grade 6 through 8 middle school, but rather a grade 5 through 8 middle school, what would perhaps the cost implication be? And is it even possible given the site that you selected?
The site being for the new
I'm sorry,
site.
yes, assuming the new, I'm sorry, yes, assuming build new.
Jim, you want to take a
Yeah,
swing at that one?
I do think it is possible. The design team was very conscious of trying to create a efficient, tight footprint because that it's a fairly constricted part of the site. And with the fully occupied middle school right next door, as you would be doing construction in that area, I think it's important to minimize the overall site impact. And I think that'll benefit the project long term, for years and years to come. It'll just give you that much more space to add parking if you needed, reconfigure bus loops, add some play fields potentially. So I think there is space there to be able to fit the fifth grade. I think the bigger question in my mind is what the impact on all the core spaces would be. And we really haven't gone through that exercise. We were really focused on the 6 through 8 with the, that enrollment. So adding another, entire grade, you're increasing the student population by 25%. And we would want to evaluate the size of the cafeteria. Right now, we're anticipating 3 waves. So would it be as simple as keeping the cafeteria the exact same size and going to 4 waves? I'm not sure if that works with the schedule. So we would want to talk to the administrators and see how something like that worked. Same thing with scheduling in a gym. If you have a single gym with a divider, you would have 2 teaching stations. But with the additional 5th graders in that building, could you schedule everybody and meet the curriculum needs, from an educational standpoint? So those would be my big questions. And like I said, the design team hasn't really evaluated that. We can take the time and do it if the committee, directs us to do it. Be more than happy to take a couple weeks and dive into it and do some diagrams, because I think you would need to understand the amount of space you need to add to understand the price that's attached to it.
Okay, fair enough. And my last question was demolition costs are built into your estimates. Can you talk about what size? I mean, do you have a price tag for that piece of it?
Yes. So to answer your first question, abatement and demolition costs are factored into both estimates. For the renovation, in total, we were abating the entire existing building, the entire middle school component of the existing building, not the gym and pool area. That was not part of our estimate. And then we were demolishing in their entirety about 31,000 square feet, full structure demolition. And then if you recall that the balance of the existing building was 104 or 151 was the number that we used. And that was a full gut demo minus demolition of the superstructure. So those 3 components together in the estimate without contingencies and escalation applied to it, in today's dollars, were estimated for just under 5 million. It was 4.89 million. And that was for the renovation piece. And then for the new concept, the full amount of the existing building was both abated and full structure demolition. So that was about 5.4 million, again, without contingencies or escalation.
Okay, thank you. And these may be numbers that, we work with, a little bit later down the road, but thanks for doing that research. Those were my so-called extra questions since last meeting. if we wanted to take advantage of Kemp and Jim now, do board members have any other of those types of questions?
My one question is if we did want to ask SLAM to put together that 5.8 configuration, what kind of timeline do you think that would be?
I'd say it'd probably be 3 to 4 weeks total. I mean, it'd probably take us a couple weeks to put some things together for first review and then doing some estimating and then present.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had mentioned, I had mentioned this at the end of the last meeting. The eligibility ratio for state reimbursement was about 1.8, and I'd really like to know what are considerations that we could all think about to try and increase the eligibility ratio to 1.0, which would thereby increase the amount of money that the state reimburses us for this project.
Yeah, really the best way to increase the eligibility factor as well as reduce costs with kind of a twofold impact would be to reduce the area of the building. So if you were to reduce your net program, which is everything that's in the ed spec, by one, just using a factor of 1 square foot, to gross up, it gets multiplied, that 1 square foot gets grossed up by 1.58, I think is the reciprocal of 63%. So that impacts your eligibility factor, and it also impacts the cost, because for at this point in time when we're budgeting, every square foot gets a dollar value assigned to it. So that's the best way to reduce costs and increase eligibility factor at the same time.
Yeah, and we've been through this on a lot of other projects, and the conversation starts with what kind of programs you could reduce. And that's always a tough conversation. You have a robust offering for the students right now, and it's a really difficult conversation to have sometimes, where you're talking about eliminating a 1,200 square foot music room and then saying, well, the kids are now going to do orchestra on the platform. So, that is one way to start reducing the overall square footage. But, it's difficult to do, because when we reviewed your ed spec, it felt appropriate. We felt that all the modern 21st century learning spaces were called for. So, and it may be as simple as reducing the overall size of some, going from an 825 square foot classroom down to an 800 square foot classroom. But you add up 25 square feet over, 20 classrooms, and it doesn't get you that far, little by little. So you can chip away at it, but it's very, very difficult to get to that 1.0. And you'll never truly get there because there are ineligible items. You can reduce the square footage and get it closer than what it is right now, but I don't think you'll ever hit the 1.0 and recognize the full state reimbursement. There's always ineligible items.
So is it basically just asking for understanding as well? The state ideal is not at all ideal, is what you're saying. It's basically too small for a school to have the offerings that Weston has.
Yeah, if you recall the discussion we had last time, where you use the middle school teaming model, the state standards, in our opinion, do not reflect that model in their state standards. It's more of based on like an old junior high school type model.
Yeah.
And so there's inefficiency. Well, so they're starting at a low spot, and then, as we talked about before, when you have the enrollment in between those two sweet spots of 360 to 720 students, where you fully load all of the classrooms at that ideal 24 students per classroom, when you're in the middle, you get impacted because you're multiplying your enrollment times the allowable area. So your allowable area is down, and then you want to build that full two-team model of space. So then you're getting impacted the opposite way, and that's why that eligibility factor is at 0.8 right now.
Gotcha.
I have a quick question I forgot to ask before, if you don't mind. The difference in a renovate and a new, it's like $1.5 million. Is there a way, are there design aspects of the build new that are nice to haves, not need to haves, where the cost for the new would actually come in at par or potentially below renovation? So that if the board wants to look at what they're going to move forward. So are there nice to haves versus need to haves in the new that can be removed, and now the build new is on par or less than renovate?
I'd have to give that some more consideration, but I don't think there are too many nice to haves. We did across both projects, we carried that sustainability initiative, $3.5 million to be apples to apples, so that both projects had that. To be determined how it's spent and how it's utilized is a future decision process. But off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that you would reduce from the new to bring it down to the reno costs. Some of the reno costs include phasing, and that's why they're so close. That's why the two numbers are so close to one another. All of those temporary provisions for phasing that construction over 3 major phases carries with it some cost, and that's why the renovation came up close to the new.
So to piggyback on what David was talking about, we haven't really discussed the operation costs once for renovation is new or for new building. For the new building, would the costs be similar operationally in the future with energy efficiency built into a new building?
Yes, I think they'd both be very similar because the renovation to new, the way we've modeled it, is a gut reno. The only thing that's really being saved is your superstructure, your columns, and your roof structure, and so forth. The exterior walls would be replaced with new modern energy code standard type wall construction. The roof would have, the amount of insulation that you would have in the new as well. So from a performance per square foot, I think that would be very similar. The only difference being is that the new concept that Jim presented had a much more compact footprint on the site, and therefore we haven't done the analysis, but it may have less exterior wall square footage, and I think it certainly has less roof area exposed to the outside. So that may improve the efficiency of the new over the reno slightly.
And just one quick question to follow up on what I was asking. So would it be you or would it be Colliers? So I know I've asked a couple of times about, I guess it was Colliers who said that there was a school where the cost to renovate and the cost to build were so close, they were able to get the reimbursement rate of a renovation to cover the new. Is that a SLAM? Is that a Colliers? Who would advise us? And have you seen like within a certain percentage? So I think I did a very quick calculation. I'm not a math expert, but it was like a 1.3% difference in cost. So like, how would you guide us on if the board is leaning towards the direction of build new, but we want to really focus on the reimbursement of renovate? Is that a you? Is that a Colliers? Is your experience that if it's within 1.5%, the state would accept it as a renovation?
I think Colliers started that conversation a few meetings back. They had, introduced the idea because they've seen it before. We were not part of that project, but so they may be able to advise better than I can. I think they would probably advise similar to how I would, is that it's something that would need to be discussed with the state. We can't guarantee that. It's not written in the statute. It's that I believe, that I am aware of. It's an interpretation of the statute as written. And so there's a bit of, I guess, negotiation that would have to take place with that approach.
We have an attorney on the board, so we're good. Right,
Yeah,
Nicole?
I think it's something worth pursuing and looking into. So I would encourage everybody to start asking the questions, and yeah, we can reach out to them. I
Yeah.
think it would be worth it.
Yeah, we talked last time, for the relatively small differential in costs, building new would have much less impact on the students and, and give you a more compact building, for those energy savings long term. All of those factors, I think, come into that argument.
Okay,
I have a few questions.
okay.
For an in the weeds question for Kent, when you calculated the renovated new, you had, if I understood it right, you had 107,000 square feet as renovate and 17,000 square feet as a new construction. What reimbursement rate did you apply to the 17,000 square feet of new construction?
We applied the renovation rate to all of the costs because it's a renovation project. You can build some new within a renovation project. You can't, I think there's a limit, and I forget the number. I think it's 25%. You can't go beyond that. The state is not going to give you that reimbursement rate for building, more than 25 or so percent of the final building area as new. They want this existing building to be renovated. But that's the way they do the calculations because it's designated a renovation project, so it's eligible for that renovation rate.
Interesting. So if you build more new things, although you're renovating less space, you may get new things, but you're penalized by a 10% reimbursement margins. So it's an interesting perspective to apply to other areas on our campus. So that's good to know. That's a good to know fact. I suspected that was the case, but if it was that you applied 10% to the 17,000 square feet, that would mean that you underpriced the rent. The gap between new and renovate for new would be slightly different, but that you gave 22% for new constructions, quite interesting, or 17.5%. We'll apply that to other areas in our thinking later tonight. Question 2. And I think this was raised smartly by the board about operation costs, energy efficiency, expandability. In neither of the analysis did you account for geothermal. I don't recall that you added that in, although Colliers had added that in their pricing in the past. And between the two options and the available field space and the availability to use that field space without disrupting operations of the geothermal welling, is there a better option between the two? Because that drives energy efficiency and operational costs over the next 20 years.
So did I hear you say that we did not include geothermal?
Colliers did 2 years ago. In your analysis, I don't think you included in your pricing a geothermal field, did you?
So we included a kind of a singular number for sustainable initiatives that could be spent any number of ways. It could be applied to geothermal. It could be applied to photovoltaics, could be applied to both in some form. And we find at this stage of the game, it's better to do that, give it a monetary value that can be decided to be spent a certain way in the future, rather than trying to define exactly what we're doing. Are we doing 100 wells? Are we doing 50 wells? It's too complex right now to be able to figure out that number.
That's fair enough. I mean, I think the the gravity will send us to a geothermal field and copious amounts of electricity, because eventually we have to charge EV buses, maybe an expanded xenon plant across the street. So why not have that scalable energy source, right? I mean, that's really a smart move from the green perspective. Excellent, thank you. And then my third comment on this part of the meeting actually builds on the call's question about our 0.63 figure merit or rule of thumb or whatever we call it, and a 0.8 similar rule of thumb. I did a deep dive into the Trumbull Middle School, and I don't know if you were directly involved in that project. But if you do the math, it's interesting enough. They actually circumvented 0.63 and they got closer to 0.75 and 0.8. Somehow they made some trade-offs, right, in their gross versus net numbers. I think they had other capabilities near that building that they siphoned off needs to, like an auditorium or stage or something like that. So they didn't have to include it. But interesting enough, they transcended 0.63 in our ed specs. We're not able to do that. And also interesting enough, I think they got much closer to 0.9 than 0.8 on their original assessment of their reimbursement rate rather than the penalty of 0.8. Politics took over, and if you read their published information, they did much better than even that. They were close to far exceeding 0.9 in the reimbursement. But all right, you weren't involved, but that's a case that I think answers two things. One is you can give up a lot if you have something else to offer next door. And two, it's really hard to go beyond 0.63 and 0.8 because you're giving up a lot. And that's not the whole point of middle school education, right? So, okay, good enough. That's a really informative exercise. And I advised my fellow board members and others listening in tonight that we should really take a deep dive into that, because it really shows how they made their decisions 2 years ago, a year ago, how their building committee works, how their politics work. It's really informative. It's a good guidepost for us.
Yeah, you do make a good point about the fact that you do have a high school facility immediately next door. And, to Jim's point earlier, if we were talking about trimming square footage out of the ed spec, if you were to do that and you had, a space in the high school that could be utilized for certain things, we've seen that before in districts.
Right. I mean, it's conceivable. I don't know if it's feasible that you could have a walkway, an arch, whatever, and use some of the high school performing arts facilities for some of the younger students in middle school. I mean, they two plays together and do things together already. So maybe that's the way of siphoning off a little square footage.
Yeah, I think one of the nicest ways to find efficiency in program is to find those potentially shared program pieces, and then you work out the logistics educationally, see if you actually have the capacity, and then make it work operationally. I think one of the advantages that the team saw when we placed the building where we did, the new building where we did, it's a lot closer to the existing high school. So I think it opens up some opportunities for those direct connections back and forth.
Good input. Thank you.
Peter, I appreciate that you brought up Trumbull, because I actually was going to ask, going back to this eligibility factor, and what Peter was talking about, the 0.63, which I'm not actually sure what that is off the top of my head, but I hear that we're not going to make it to 1.0, and I hear that 0.8 is reasonable. I'm just wondering if you have comparable projects where they made decisions or trade-offs where they were able to increase their eligibility factor that maybe we could understand better.
Yeah, I think the two middle school projects that we've been involved with are Groton Middle School, which is brand new, and Greenwich Central Middle School that's under construction right now. And we went through that process with them. Neither of them got close to one, but there was a process that we went through so that that factor improved and ultimately, they gained some state dollars on the project.
I think Groton was much closer to the 1.0 because they had a higher enrollment. That was for 950 students, and so they were able to capitalize on getting those additional allowable area calcs to work in their favor. Greenwich is very similar to your enrollment. I think it was 660 student school, so it's about 100 square foot or 100 students different, which allowed their allowable to be higher than yours, and they're building pretty close to what you have in your ed spec right now. But that project came in at 62.5 net to gross, and part of the reason why is goes back to what you were talking about, Peter, a few minutes ago. Sustainable initiatives. They had an initiative to try and get to net zero, and so we worked with them to maximize open roof area for photovoltaics. And to maximize open roof area, we ended up moving some of the air handling units inside, and it actually worked out quite well in that particular project because we were building into a hillside, and so we were able to put those air handlers, kind of in the hill, if you will, you know what I mean, in the basement, and so that preserved roof area to maximize the photovoltaic output, and so that creating those mechanical rooms inside impacted the area, and therefore you had that lower than 63 net to gross. That was part of what drove that. If you put everything on the roof, yes, you can be more efficient with your building net to gross area, but then you take away the ability to put more photovoltaics on the roof. So there's a bit of a trade-off.
And can you please clarify why comparable projects would be middle schools only and why we wouldn't be able to look at other school constructions as comps?
For what in particular?
Trying to increase the factor.
Again, it goes back to the allowable area that the state publishes for middle schools. And that's the one item that is driving that eligibility factor.
Okay, so that's not per student, it's actually per middle school student.
Well, it is. The state looks at middle school, that 6th through 8th grade, they'll allocate 168 square feet per student. You get to the elementary school level and it varies a little bit, but you're looking more like 121 square feet per student. Then the high school number goes back up incrementally. So I think we have to look at comps within that middle school range.
Yeah, you
Okay.
need to look at middle schools for true comps.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
See, that's what complicates the 5th grade there, because now you're building buildings, but you have less allowable space, yet you have to sort of build that to match a 60-18 model. So it's very,
That's why we would have to study the 5-8 model.
right. It's
Because there's so many variables that come into play that it's hard to answer a question without looking at all the variables.
Right. And it may be like you say, you have to account for air gaps between the ed spaces. That's basically how you began tonight. And 5th graders probably can't share bathrooms with 6th and 8th graders. Maybe, I don't know. We'll ask our principals how that works. But you can see how now your air gaps change, because if you can share bathrooms between 6th and 8th graders, you have shared space for those students, but you don't get the benefit of that in 5th graders shouldn't share space. It's a very complex analysis. So I appreciate that you agreed with our board to take it on for the next 2 weeks.
Okay, I think at this point we're asking great questions, but they're also getting a little bit too detailed in terms of design work and reviewing ed specs, which I think we will get to, but perhaps not right at this moment. I think let's try to keep our questions just a little bit more general at this point. You can see the doors that are opening and the questions that, we still have remaining, but some of that we'll get into the threshold of design, and some of it gets into what we can do for a higher reimbursement rate. So let's just take a couple of steps backwards first. The fifth grade, the 5 through 8 building, I know you said you need to get into much more detail to give us a sense of cost. Do you have sort of a back of an envelope kind of general sense that if you increase the population by 25%, you therefore need to increase the construction cost by X? And if not, that's fine. I'd just like to know that,
Yeah.
because then we'll have to figure out if we want that much detail.
We really don't. It's not a linear relationship like that. It's
Okay.
much more variables at play, because it's going to change your allowable area, which then changes the eligibility factor, and then we need to know, how many classrooms, as Jim mentioned, the specials spaces. We need to have an understanding of that and
Okay.
schedule. So it really is a study on its own.
Okay. Can we at least assume price will go up?
Well, I mean, if you're
Just-
going to keep more of your existing building and renovate it in a renovation scenario, yes, I mean, I would think that they would go up, but you'd be also demoing less. So it kind of all comes into what's the scenario.
Right. And again, going back to the question about the site for build new, the general question is, can it be done? Would it fit?
Yeah, I have no doubt that you could fit it on the site, especially with a more compact multi-story classroom wing. It just would not look exactly like what Jim has
Right,
shown you to
right.
date.
Okay, and again, I don't want to get into design. All right, so I think I understand, we need to do a more formal study on the 5 through 8, and maybe we will get there. So we know what we have to do to find the answers there. Are there any other questions before we get on to our more general discussion, which I guess what I'm trying to do is not put the cart before the horse. So I just think, for me anyway, I think the question that we need to kind of dive into is, as we look at these two approaches, renovate as new or build new, can we talk about which of those options make more sense, which is preferable, which road is the better road to go down? So I think I'd like to kind of shift into that mode. We have a lot to do. So anyway, but I just kind of like to kind of look at that point first, if board members don't mind, and have everybody weigh in, and then let's see where we are. And I think Kemp and Jim, I don't want to hold you here for the entire meeting. So I know that you're available, and I know where Phil lives, and so we know how to get in touch with you. So again, appreciate your attendance here. But now I think we just need to do the two roads diverged in a woods and, figure out what path we want to pursue more in depth. Okay,
Okay.
so thank you, Jim and Kemp. And I'm trying to also take advantage of David's limited time with us. So David, I don't know if you want to weigh in first. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just know that you have to leave.
Yeah.
But I'd like to get everybody's opinion on, as we're presented with these two options, which makes the more sense in terms of our ultimate goal.
Yeah, I'll jump in because I got to run in a couple of minutes. I think that the build new makes the most amount of sense. It's from a financial perspective, the delta is so minimal. We don't get into the constant putting of the children in the portables. It's a lot less disruptive. So I would say there isn't, in my mind, there's not a single compelling reason not to do build new. So I'm all in on the build new. I think it's the responsible choice financially and educationally.
All right, thank you. I'd like to hear from everybody. You don't have to opine, but just get a sense of where you're coming from.
I agree with David. I think we we have to build as new. And if you look at the risk that we could take if we renovate as new, although they've tried to factor in as much as they could, there are still unknowns. And the small amount to build as new just it just is important that we build as new because the risk to renovate as new is too great, and the possibility of the costs escalating and that unknown, I don't believe we should take.
Thank you.
I'll hop in here.
Mhm.
David, shockingly, I'm on the same page as you. I agree. I think that for me, the biggest issue, thanks, David. For me, the biggest issue is just the disruption that would take place and also the amount of time that would take place. I think that the delta between the renovate is new and build new is just not worth that disruption in particular and what that would do to children's actual education, which is why we're here. So I think that that is the case, but I do think that excuse me, we have to be responsible in as far as really looking very closely at grade configuration. And if we can, I mean, if we can minimize it as best as possible, obviously we need to right size the middle school. If we do go with a new route, we have to right size it. But is it right sizing it that way, or is it changing the grade configuration so we can potentially get to 3 schools? I don't know. But I do think that the middle school has got to be addressed. And I think that renovating as new is not the path that I would be inclined to go towards.
Thanks.
Who's left? Me and Nicole?
Sure, go ahead, Peter.
Well, we're where we were 2 years ago, but I think with a much better, deeper understanding of where we were 2 years ago, is that we liked how the principals gave really deep why experience on why our current grade configuration works for a very good school district. We know that a build for new, I think David said it very well, is almost a no risk, no uncertainty option. I think we're going to save a lot on operational expenses. And it makes us competitive because many school districts are building new buildings and we're not. And that is going to be a strike against us for recruiting, attracting younger families on a stake raising their families in Weston in a very crowded, complex Fairfield County. But we're still have done nothing. So the third option is no action. And that's the highest risk, of course, and the highest uncertainty, and may cost us the most. And I think we'll return to the fourth option, which is a 3-building option because Sharon raised it, and that has to be explored. And let's talk about that in a little bit once Nicole chimes in on new versus renovate just on this one site.
There's Michael too.
I don't care, but Nicole
Okay.
and Michael.
Okay. I didn't say that Michael joined us. Great.
Nicole, Michael, either one?
Sure, Nicole, you want to go?
Sure. I agree with everyone. Mostly rationale of what was mentioned, David and Peter. I think I agree with build as new based on the numbers and presentation that SLAM provided to us last week. I think with everything, it is just really important to do all of our due diligence, give all of the information to the public, and explore all of the options. So I think, for example, if we all approve that they are going to examine a grade 5 to 8 configuration, I think that those numbers need to be applied to both renovate as new and build new, because you need to know, you just need to give the facts to the people if we're going to go through this work. So I don't know if my opinion might change with more information, but as of right now, given the numbers that they provided last week, there is no, as David said, there's no compelling reason not to build new, but there's just no compelling reason to renovate given the negligible difference in cost. And I also agree with Peter that it's still not a number, an option that I really feel comfortable with without doing. I just think there's a lot we need to scrutinize and a lot we need to consider. I think it seems like we're still where Peter said, where we were 2 years ago with just inflated higher numbers as expected for building a middle school. And so I just still think there's more work to be done.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just I'll jump in quickly. I'm not going to reiterate what everyone said. Build as new makes the most sense at this stage. Of course, we'd have to, go through the calculations. I'd like to push a little bit more, delve into the 5 to 8. There are a lot of factors there to consider. More students. Of course, there's the adjusted, square footage per student for the 5th grade. Fine. But potentially then you're going to a dyad model for the 5th and 6th grade versus a T model for the 7th and 8th. Does that change the calculus there as well in terms of the eligibility factor? Don't know. So I think we should push on that and dive into what a 5 to 8 configuration actually looks like for that. Also, the other outstanding question, as everyone knows here, is how do we go about, how realistic is it for us to secure renovate as new reimbursement for a new build? And I think I need to understand that. So the way I think about this, it's sort of those are the two major questions. I guess Collier's has to provide us a little bit more, Deb, guidance as to how we would go about doing that, how we would engage, how much time we need to engage with the state in order to try to secure that higher reimbursement rate. So I'd love to understand that a little bit more as well. But right now, to what everyone said, because of the delay and disruption and just cutting edge, I would build as new makes the most sense.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I appreciate everybody's viewpoints, and everyone has said all the reasons that I could possibly think of and more. I support the build new approach as well. So I'm just glad. I know that doesn't seem like a lot to some people, but to me, it means a lot that we're all kind of looking at one, one road, at least at this point. The grade 5 through 8 question. Well, let me think. Before we get to that point, the reason I brought it up is the opinion of probable costs. And I think I don't even think we need to kind of go around and talk. I can hear that we all think the price is high. We think it's astounding. At least that's my personal opinion. And we're all looking for ways to attack that probable cost. One way is to get in and look at the weeds, as we started to do with, what are the size of the classrooms? Is there something we could offload, make smaller, whatever? So there's the actual design or the ed specs themselves. Another approach, and this is why I asked if we could know the demo price, is are there, and this is not a SLAM question. I mean, it might be, but I don't think it's their total expertise. Are there grants out there for which this project could apply? One of which might be along the demo line, because if there are contaminants in any way, shape, or form, and we have to sort of clean them up, if you will, is there grant funding available for a piece or a portion of that? Another thing is, I'm so glad SLAM separated out the energy initiatives. Again, I think that is perhaps ripe for grant opportunities. There may be, incentives for, and you all had all the technical ways of doing alternative sustainable energy. So I'm not the engineer by any stretch, but there may be grant opportunities out there for the energy portion of it. I also think we could make a great argument to the state that for $1.5 million difference, it's de minimis. And, it's silly on that size a number. to have to distinguish between renovate and build as new. The differential there is so silly. I mean, not silly, but inconsequential when you look at the number. So I think we could make a good argument. I also think Kemp brought up the idea that the state is outdated in its look at middle school design. We could argue that the penalty for not full utilization, that ought to go away if you're going to build a middle school. We shouldn't, in other words, we shouldn't have our instructional model, which has been around for decades and is very common, used against us because we're not doing the sort of egg crate approach of a smaller elementary school. So we could make that argument. So all that said, and those are all great, I think, roads to go down. I still think there are more. I was so glad to see Peter remind us that Trumbull got 44% reimbursement. And this is not something that SLAM can argue. It is something that our town and our politicians need to investigate. I think that I understand that Connecticut has these regulations. I understand that it is the formulas that are applied are based on a town's wealth. No one will argue that Weston is not wealthy, but I do think that the range, starting at something like less than 10% for wealthy districts, all the way up to 80% for districts with much higher financial need. I get that there should be a range. I do not understand why the floor is so low. Because when you're talking about the scale of construction projects and the multi-millions of dollars there is, that percentage just doesn't work. We are not talking about asking for a grant for computers. We're asking for a grant to improve our infrastructure, which can't cost less than multi-millions of dollars. So I do think that we need to do all that we can as board members, working with our first select woman, who is the liaison between us and the state and our state legislators, that we need to go and build the best case we can for a much, much higher reimbursement rate. And that is not to say we don't do all the other paths that we just mentioned and everyone brought up. I think we need to do it all, kind of all of the above, and see what those roads look like, what those challenges are. The other thing in Weston is that we are small. And so I was looking at, and this is me rambling, so thank you for listening. But I know that Westport is trying to build an elementary school, and they've gotten close to a 20% reimbursement rate, which, you know, sort of represents the renovate kind of high end of that. So however they did that, you know, good for them. But that's not enough, because in Weston, we're so much smaller. So Westport has 4 elementary schools. It would be as if Westport said, you know, just that neighborhood around, I think it's Long Lot School, just those neighbors are going to pay for that elementary school. And that's kind of what I feel like the burden is in Weston. It's like we're a neighborhood school, a small neighborhood school. And again, the costs are astronomical for the number of residents. And so our size, again, kind of hurts us. And also, we all know that we don't have a commercial base. And I'm not suggesting we need to change that or anything, but it's just reality. So I think there's some arguments that we need to support with a lot of data that we can make to our state legislators. And we need to do that sooner than later. And we also need to look for grant possibilities. We also need to review the ed specs and see if we can reduce the actual cost. We need to do all of that at once and fast. So we have an EOC subcommittee. So I think the members on that committee. We also have a communications committee, and we have our board officers. So between all of those, I don't want to say cast of characters, but I will. If we could agree that we're going to sort of divide and conquer and go down all these different roads and see what the process is entailed with each one of them. So I'm talking about grants. I'm talking about getting closer to the, the highest reimbursement rate possible with the state. I'm also talking about asking for a much bigger reimbursement rate than state law now prescribes for Weston. The formula, I think, is just very damaging and does not help at all with the affordability factor for the taxpayers here. We have to figure out a way to bring that down. So maybe it's an issue that is, well, obviously it's fraught with challenge, but I think we need to try. I think it's incumbent on us to sort of go out and see what we can do. The other possibility, and this was brought up, I think, in an email that the board received, was what about just going to 3 schools? So to me, the way to do that is either you slide the kids up or you slide the kids down in terms of grade levels. If, for instance, we just abandoned the middle school, just said, okay, we'll just leave it, and we'll try to fit our kids into Hess and to WIS. And believe it or not, I think Collier's summarized that for us. That was studied in 2019. There is an option that talks about making Hess K5 or K4 and WIS grade 6 through 8 or grade 5 through 8. And there's even a price attached. So I think, and I'm going to look at Phil, I think if Collier's, just for our, for our edification and to go down every single road we can, that would result in 3 schools. I'm not sure it's the wisest move at all, but at least let's look at it because it has been asked and answered to some extent in 2019, I think. So I wonder if Collier's could take a quick look at that and tell us what ballpark we're looking at. The other way to do 3 schools, and I was interested in doing it sooner than later, but maybe we could be later, is having the capacity of a new middle school, have the capacity, the potential to put 5th grade there. And it doesn't have to happen tomorrow. It doesn't have to happen 5 years from now. But if we build a building that has the flexibility to incorporate more kids, and when that flexibility would be needed is a question. But if we could make a middle school 5-8, then WIS opens itself up to take more students. And Hess opens itself up to take fewer students. And maybe I'm not sure to empty Hess entirely, but there are, as the first select woman told us a few meetings ago, there are needs in the town. So at some point, perhaps having Hess be more available for town needs, whether it's the senior center or other things, might, in the long term, down the road, be somewhat helpful. But those are the only 2 ways I see to get to 3 schools. One is long-term, building a new middle school with perhaps expandable capability to take another grade level, and eventually moving more kids out of Hess and into WIS, and whatever we have to do for WIS, that's a whole other study. The other thing is, I think the worst case scenario is saying, well, let's just forget even trying to build a new middle school or trying to renovate a new middle school. Let's do Hess K4 and WIS 5-8 and be done with it. And there's that, again, that's the question that was asked in 2017 or 2019. And we can relook at that and just kind of have Collier's do a high level conceptual answer. Because I think some people in town will have that because the price that we're looking at currently is astounding. So this is the time to look at everything. Doesn't mean that they're realistic, but we at least look at it. So I'm trying to, as a Board of Ed, do due diligence. And anyway, I'm sorry I talked so long, but I welcome input, feedback, and debate. Nicole.
Thank you for that. I'm just wondering, can you just explain your thinking a little bit in your second choice, your second option of, can we talk about having a middle school that has capacity to expand and accept a new grade in the longer term? Why for you is that a longer term initiative rather than an immediate?
Thank you. I think that's a great question, and I think the board needs to decide that. I guess my gut is that 5 or 6 through 8 is expensive enough. So maybe we hold off on more cost until later. That's the rationale. It doesn't mean it's the best one, but that was the thinking. That we at least have a building that has flexibility. And when we use that flexibility, we don't know. But I can, that's something we could talk about.
Hey, Deb, just a really quick question on just process here. Seem to be a lot of questions still standing, and we're running out of time a little bit here. We had discussed a couple meetings ago in terms of applying for the grant, and that applying for the grant this year versus applying for the grant next year didn't have I guess there's an impact. I guess I'm unaware of what the exact impact is in terms of timing delay. But I think what Slam had mentioned previously was that it wasn't significant in terms of that delay. Is that still the case? Do you have a firmer grasp of what the delay would be if we applied for the grant this year versus applying for it next year? You're on mute. You're on mute.
I think Kemp and Jim will regret that they stayed on. But I think what I heard at the last meeting, when they did that timeline for us,
Yeah.
that waiting on the grant is in fact going to push out everything. Not that it can't be done, but that it does have an impact on timing. And again, I think, well, I don't know. Kemp, I don't know if you have a clear explanation.
Yeah, I think can I share the screen? I want to put the schedule up from last time. I think I need permission.
Yeah, and one thing that we should probably talk about is proceeding before the grant application is in, because oftentimes there's a minimal risk and minimal investment. The design team could get started designing the building before the grant is even made, but the town proceeds at risk. And the risk is that you go and apply for the grant and the funding is not approved for some reason, which very rarely happens. It's almost always when you have the project established, well organized, and are moving forward, the state very rarely does not fund it. But that would be one way where you could accelerate the schedule, because you could just start the design before the grant app was actually made. And I think Kemp has a couple of examples recently, or in the last couple of years, where the town did choose to do that.
Yeah, and that's why we recommended this. If you recall from last time, the light green bar here represents the year that the grant application would go in June 26. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. Oops. Sorry about that. Hang on. There we go. So June 26, if you put it in this year, and then it takes a year for it to get processed and so forth. And then you can start applying for reimbursement. And so with the design fees that are associated with this, it's in the scheme of things, relatively small amounts of money for this town to fund in the short term. And then you can start to get reimbursement on that. If you wait until June 2027 to put the grant in, and if you started designing back here, then you can start reimbursements, and then you're into construction dollars. And that's a lot. You still have to, as a town, you have to get reimbursement, but to wait that amount of time to get the reimbursement could be a challenge.
And that's where your level of risk goes up a little bit because you're expending more funds.
Got it. Okay. So for all intents and purposes, we really should meet the deadline here to minimize the risk of the project, to meet the deadline for the grant application of applying for this year. So, okay. I guess then, guys, well, let me take it back to you, Deb. I guess there are a bunch of things then on the docket here for us to pursue. One of them is potentially for us to move forward and authorize SLAM to go ahead and do this 5 to 8 study. I mean, my assumption, Deb, was that if we moved 5 to 8, I guess, that we would go to 3 schools, right? I didn't. I guess my initial thought was, why would we still maintain the 4 schools if we were building a larger school now that was going to cost us more money, potentially more efficient, potentially on the eligibility factor. I don't know where that's going to sort of get out. But the extra cost that we would put into that, of course, my thought was we wouldn't maintain the 4 schools.
Mhm.
We would just go ahead and move into 3 schools. And over time, sort of you're recouping that extra expense, right? Because now you're maintaining, fewer buildings over time for the town. So I guess the question is, do we want to move forward? I think we should, but it's up to the board. Do we want to move forward with having SLAM actually take a deep dive into the 5 to 8 just to see what it is? Because I think we're going to have to decide on this pretty quickly if this is going to take them a month.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess my concern
Yeah.
is that it's not only 5-8 that you would be. I mean, we could redesign, okay, from new. That's one phase, but you also have to look at WIS, and that's going to take money, and
Yeah.
that's going to take site design, and that site is challenging the way it was built. So that's why I would say maybe we kind of pause on that thinking, because that's a whole other building project, is the way I guess I'm looking at it, to try to make WIS accommodate enough kids to truly, take students out of HES.
Right.
If you made more minor changes at WIS, which is maybe the more realistic way to go versus given the site there, because I think, again, looking back at some of the earlier studies that have been done in 2017 and 2019, it's a challenging site.
Yeah.
So maybe preschool would stay at HES, maybe kindergarten would stay at HES. There may be some benefits to having grades remain at HES. So that, I just think it's if we're having trouble trying to figure out what to do with the middle school,
Yeah, it's a left.
It's a whole other universe of a building project. So that's why I was suggesting, if we take a chunk and say, can we at least have enough flexibility on the site and a potential future design for 5-8, then that opens the door. But we don't have to go through the door right now.
Yeah. So in terms of next steps for you, Deb, is it, do we move forward and have SLAM potentially do that now, in addition to, organizing however we're going to as a town to petition the state basically for the reimbursement rates and everything else? How do you see this all coming together? Because we have basically 3.5 months.
Right. I don't know.
And you don't have to answer the question now. It's just it's a lot to take in. I just want to make sure that
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I put so much on the table, but
yeah,
knowing our timeline,
yeah,
and knowing the historical question of, well, just put, can't you just put the kids in three schools?
right.
There's an old model sitting there that I think Colliers can take a quick look at that $88 million price tag that it was in 2019 and kind of extrapolate what that would even potentially entail. But again, so that's one thing, where you basically abandon the middle school and try to get K-8 in Hess and West. So I think that's a due diligence question.
Yeah.
The other one, to me, more realistic, is if we go down the build a new middle school, how could we eventually get to 3 buildings? You ask a great question. When is the best time to dig into the details of putting a 5th grade in a new middle school? And I don't know whether if that's something Slam wanted to opine on, or if the administration wants to think about, or other board members have advice. I don't know. I would suggest that we look at least assuring ourselves that the potential is there. So what that takes, I don't know.
I can just add that in my experience dealing with different towns, if you're looking at a single element, a single school, and trying to sell it, and there's a lot of other questions about, well, what are you going to do with that school when all those students move out? If you don't come in with a comprehensive plan and answers to all those questions, oftentimes the referendum is an uphill battle because there's so many questions left. So sometimes coming in with a comprehensive plan and a clear understanding of what you intend to do in every one of the buildings and what the cost of that potentially is, you can still spread that out over some time. But if you don't have the big picture, often it's a tough sell.
Okay,
Thanks, Jim. Point taken.
thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else have thoughts?
This is just very layperson. I
We're all
understand.
that. We're all those.
I understand everything you're saying about waiting to add a 5th grade later on because it's going to be a large cost. But my hunch is that by us asking and inquiring about adding a new middle school into the whole building now, we're trying to increase eligibility to just somehow maximize our state reimbursement, and also just thinking about reasons why we don't want to do the renovation because it's phased, and phased adds time, money, inconvenience, disruption. Do the same thing about adding a 5th grade to the middle school down the road. So, and just would likely be more costly. So I just think if it would be an option, it's probably, of course, Slam will tell us, but it would probably be the more efficient time, disruption, money option to create a 4th grade school now.
Okay. All right. Oh boy. My computer's about to give out. Let me just plug it in.
Hey, while you're doing that,
All right,
Deb,
I did. Yes.
jump in. I don't necessarily disagree with Nicole on this, on that point. The only thing I think that maybe you're thinking about, Deb, that does give me pause too. So I don't know where I shake out on this, but it's just the sheer number, the sheer cost. So, we may be boosting the eligibility factor, and so thereby boosting the reimbursement, but at the same time boosting the ultimate price tag for us, right, at one time. And the number is already high. I mean, the number to build the, renovate is new or build a middle school, build a new building, is already, very high. And I think we've all acknowledged that. So I think that's sort of the mitigating factor here, which, well, again, I'm rambling, but I'm trying to think out loud in terms of, I would love to do the right thing, the most efficient thing here, which is to explore, let's say, the 5 to 8. It could open up additional costs for us, but I do think we've gone this far, Deb. I'll shut up in a second. We've gone this far, Deb. I think we need to sort of play this thing out and see what costs we're actually talking about here. If you know, with the 5 to 8 option. So my thought.
Okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate Nicole. I don't know if Sharon or Peter or Lisa, any other thoughts?
I agree. I agree with you, Michael. I definitely think we need to explore a building that's a 5-8 building. And I think that we have to have, I do think we as a board have to have a plan, to Jim's point, to explain to people in town what our long-term thinking is on the campus. If it's, to go with a 5-8 and then create, a K-4 scenario at WIS eventually, keeping the administration, the senior center, and preschool in Hurlbut. I think that's, if that's something that we want to aim towards, we have to come up with a plan that we can articulate to people when they start asking us about spending all this money. And we can talk about, if we're doing that, and if the town is helping to, since we would have the senior center in there and et cetera, maybe like having the town pick up, maybe have the Parks and Rec in there. I'm not sure. We have to have a bigger conversation for that. But, not having to float 100% the cost of maintaining Hurlbut and keeping that going, that would become more of a town building than it would be of a school building. If we could figure some way to do that, or come up with a strategy to be able to vocalize that to the community, I think that's probably a wise way to go about it. But I agree. I think there's got to be some sort of flexibility, or at least we have to look and see what it looks like to have a 5-8 middle school.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
I guess more information is good to a certain point. My intuition is the information is going to lead us to the conclusion, build a new middle school. It's the least risk, least uncertain, most fiscally prudent way of moving us forward. I'm not Jim, I'm not Kent. These guys are, as good as I've seen civil engineering and architects and building envisionment. I did my analysis during the summer. I announced it in September, right at our board meeting. I know what the number is, because if it's $30 million per 160 kids to move the pieces around the chessboard, you're going to exceed $160 million doing everything but a 6-8 middle school. But I'm leaving it to the experts to confirm that, right? This is just me and my pencil, right, on a rainy Sunday afternoon in August. But you have to do the work. And I think it's fair to the town, to the stakeholders, to have done some work like this, just to indicate just how complex, how uncertain, multiple building projects on multiple buildings at the same time, even within the span of a few years, is untenable. But you have to do the work, because they need that comparison data point. They need to sit there and go, I like the low risk, great option of new middle school. Renovate as new is too risky, too uncertain. Doing nothing is almost the worst case scenario. And then consolidating and moving pieces around the chessboard of 39 acres is almost worse than doing nothing. But I want the experts to do this work in the next few weeks, because as Michael says, the clock's ticking. And I think it's only fair to 10,000 people in town of Weston, if they have this in front of me. So that includes all the students too. They should know what's ahead of them as they grow older and make commitments to be educated in our community as part of their family units, right? So all 10,000 people deserve better information. I think it will serve everyone better with that.
Okay. All right. So what I'm hearing is that we want to go down the build new, and we want information about a grade 5-8 school. At least some sort of preliminary, but real look at it. I think I'm capturing what people are saying. If not, let me know. And I think what I need to do is talk to Phil and Erica about what our budget is for the rest of the year and, how much we can, put towards finding out this information, and I can do that separately. I also think our EOC committee should meet. And I think that in terms of pursuing either grants and or higher reimbursement, part of that's in the political realm. I know our first select woman is the liaison with the state legislators. And so I need to meet with her, and we need to figure out the case we can make for a larger reimbursement rate, separate and apart and above from what the state limits are. And I know there are contacts. I know Lisa is a member, she's our representative to CABE. Erica is a member of the superintendent group. David is a member of the Cooperative Education Service. And all of those organizations probably can guide us to knowledgeable people in the grant field and or the reimbursement argument field. So I think we should pursue those routes as well. And again, we have board members who and staff who are liaison or whatever it is, contacts for all of those different organizations. So let's pursue those. And then we will meet, I think our regular meeting, Jody, March 16th.
Yes,
Okay,
March
okay.
16th. And then
Okay.
EOC also meets on March 20th.
All right, we may need a EOC meeting before then, but we can talk about that offline. And then we need to look at the number themselves, and I don't mean to put Phil on the spot, but I think Phil has already reached out to Colliers. He is our owner's representative at this point, or they are our owner's rep at this point. And so in terms of reviewing the ed specs, reviewing the estimate, kind of getting a second opinion, if you will, that some of that could be done by Colliers. So I'm going to ask, Phil to pursue that as well. And then if the EOC group, needs to sort of dig into the ed specs better and the pricing and hear more details, we can do that. So that's a lot to do between now and our next meeting, but let's give it a try. Right? This is hard stuff. And for those watching, this is kind of how the sausage is made, I guess. It's not a straight line. Any advice, comments, questions that sound like a plan between now and March 16th? Meet, again, contact those organizations, meet with the politicians, meet with the first select woman, do all we can to uncover grants, to make political arguments on higher reimbursement, and then also to dig into some of the ed spec questions and what could we, if we needed to reduce, what would that look like and what would that mean? And also pursue, do we have the budget to ask SLAM to do some more research on a 5-8 school versus a 6-8 school? That sound okay? All right, I'm seeing nodding heads, and I'm going to take that as a good sign. So is there any other items that I have missed? I'm sure there are, but anything anyone else wants to bring up tonight related? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Thank you,
Second.
Sharon. Thank you, Lisa. All right, going once, going twice. All in favor of adjourning? All right. So be careful out there, as they say, as we try to pursue all these various leads and work. So thank you.